What is up, guys? I figured I'd post a little update today about the alpha development board. I know quite a few of you guys jumped in and watched me solder that thing together. This is kind of what it's looking like right now. It's got some jumper wires fixed to it. It's got the development board attached to it, as well as the playground itself. So this is the full version of what it should look like without the external emulation adapter on it to fit it into an ECU. I figured I'd kind of just jump into some things that we can play around on this thing with, some things you might expect or run into when developing an emulator, and why I sort of went that route with certain things I chose. I think a lot of you guys have been questioning why there is a bulky development board when I have the Alpha Micro, which is already proven in video to be working directly with HTS. It does live updates and all that good stuff. The reason for this is because I want to show people how to create an emulator on their own, and I want to provide tools that allow people to do that type of thing. Even though I have my own working device and a micro footprint, I guess I kind of want to show you along the ways how I got there and how we figure out how hardware works. I guess this is really to expose the difference between open source and closed source. I'm here to show you guys how and why things work, and closed source is here to just take money from you and put it in their pockets. First things first, let's talk about buffers or latches and why we might use them in an emulation project. A buffer and a latch can actually both effectively be used in the same exact purpose, even though latches are more intended to grab onto data and retain it and hold it while it's not actually present. So the way that a latch works is there's an input and there's an output, and you can choose to make the outputs present all the time, or you can choose to make them non-transparent so there's no outputs, or you can choose to grab data that's on the input, hold it, disconnect the input, but even though there's still data that's held there, even though it's not hooked up, but if the last data was going there, it's still held, and we can put that on the outputs and display it so that the ECU, for example, sees data when it's disconnected. That's really a legacy method for when you're doing really slow updates to the device and you need to fake it like there is something present when it's not. There's really no need for a data latch in an emulator if you're having a current modern processor. The benefit of using a latch is the fact that it is also a buffer. It can choose to be transparent, allows data to flow through it, or you can choose for it to be non-transparent so that one side of the data is always disconnected. And the reason we do that is because with an emulator, whether you're emulating the memory itself directly through the processor, or you're using a NVRAM, an SRAM, an FRAM to hold the data retention, you always have two masters. You have the MCU, which is going to be master number one, that's your processor, like in our case the RP2350, or you have the secondary master, which is going to be the ECU itself. And the way that that works with masters is each master is sending out specific address lines and it's receiving specific data bits. So when you set certain, in parallel memory, when you set certain address lines high or low, you access different banks or sectors or specific lines inside of that memory. And those specific lines can then be output on the data bus side, so you can see what's going on there. Now, if you have a master device, such as the ECU, that's trying to access the static parallel memory, at the same time the ECU is trying to access the parallel memory, you'll get what's called bus contention, right? So that's when two different devices are trying to drive something, when you can only use one device at a time to actually drive what's going on. The reason that we would use latches now inside of an emulator application isn't so much to latch and hold data so that it's present while we do something in the background. It's actually to use it as a buffer without a direction control. Because standard buffers, they are bidirectional, so you can set a direction from side A to side B, or from side B to side A, right? And in doing that, it requires additional circuitry, it requires additional components like passives, that takes up real estate on a circuit board. Now, if we look at latches, they don't really have bidirectional data flow, so you can't flow from A to B and from B to A. It just has an input side and an output side. So with the ECU in mind, we know that the ECU is always going to drive the address lines. It's going to be sending information from the ECU to the SRAM or the NVRAM, the memory, whatever you're using. And with that being said, there's an input and there's an output, right? We know that we need to have it fixed in one way so that the ECU is on the input side and that the memory is on the output side so that it can drive from the ECU to the memory. Now, the data bus is actually the opposite. The data bus would need to flow from the memory to the ECU. In order to get it to flow that way, we would literally just flip the chip, the latch, in the opposite direction so that the inputs are really outputs and the outputs are really inputs. And that just means it's going to work in the opposite direction of the address latches. And the reason we do that is because a latch doesn't need any additional circuitry for data direction or control. We don't need passives, we don't need additional circuitry. All we need is a simple control of the outputs enabled signal. So latches can actually require less real estate than a buffer itself would require, and a latch can actually have faster propagation timing than a buffer as well. And not only that, latches can be found doing the same thing that a lot of these buffers are. And a lot of these buffers are logic level controlled buffers, so they change the output and input voltage to match. The ECU is a 5-volt logic. Most MCUs in memory, at least stuff that's not legacy, something that's current, is going to be a 3.3 volt logic level. ECU doesn't actually require a full 5 volts back at it to set things and see things the way that they are. It operates on TTL logic. So anything above 2 volts is basically considered high, anything under 2 volts is considered low. So with that being said, a 3.3 volt logic device out to the ECU is actually more than enough to make the ECU cooperate and see what it needs to see. So we don't really need to have a level shifting device per se. We simply need to have a device that is 5 volt tolerant so that it can take these 5 volt input signals from the ECU. It can taper those down to 3.3 volt logic, send it over to our memory or our MCU without any sort of interference. And when we are outputting from our memory back to the ECU, it's going to be on the data side only. And the data side just needs to be over 2 volts. So we can use 3.3 volt logic components that are 5 volt tolerant. We don't need to actually upscale them back to 5 volts to go back to the ECU. So buffers can actually be removed from the equation. The playground was designed so that you could use buffers or latches so that you can figure out what components you prefer or like. Maybe you get a better price point on something. Maybe you just inherently like the behavior of one device over the other. So I incorporated both of those onto the same playground so that you could play with different options. Another major thing we should talk about is the output enable control signal. So the ECU has its own output enable. We call it the OKI OE signal or the OKI OE control, or just plain and simple the OKI OE. The OKI OE needs to have at least explicit ownership of the data bus. Technically, you could leave the address buses fixed in a certain direction, control it with the MCU, but the data bus itself must be controlled by the OKI OE, or you need to have your MCU monitoring the OKI OE signal and repeating it back out to your buffers. So ownership is important in this application, and what we can find is that we need to always have the output enable pins disabled, so they need to be pulled high, and then whenever the OKI OE actually goes low, meaning it's accessed, it can have ownership over those buffers. So that's something to remember, is when you're using either a latch or a buffer and it comes to the output enable pins going to the ECU side, you need to have active pull-up resistors on the output enable and let the OKI OE drive those output enables low whenever it is going low. if you leave just the Oki OE in charge of the output enable pin, you'll find that when the device is out of the car, it actually doesn't work appropriately because it's kind of floating on OE, and you're going to get sporadic data back feeding to that memory chip, so your MCU's trying to read from it or write to it, and your buffers are actually outputting some specific signals as well, and those conflict at the chip, and you're going to find that you have issues with it. So these switches up here on the top allow us to turn on either the latch setup or to turn on the two different voltage levels on the buffers themselves. So we can turn the buffers or the latches entirely off. We also, in this corner over here, sorry, my webcam's kind of weird with the lighting. Over here we have pull-ups and pull-downs, so we can actively take signals here and we can inject them back into the device. So over here, this jumper wire is actually to simulate the Oki OE strobing sequence that's going on, and I can set either a pull-up or a pull-down on that to simulate the Oki device being in a high or a low state. These other jumpers on this side, they are actually just jumpers going from the additional pins on the RP2350 device to LEDs, my diagnostic LEDs. As far as power management goes, that's something else I wanted to talk about. You can use something as simple as a regular diode just to kind of make sure that voltage can't backflow from two different sources. So obviously your USB is going to be one power source and the ECU is going to be a secondary power source. And you don't want those two 5-volt rails to really conflict with each other. So by putting a diode in place of each of them, you can prevent them from backfeeding each other. Or you can use something with a low voltage dropout. So I'm using these Max 4200s, which are basically like a very low voltage drop diode that has an output enable on it as well. And those just allow you to forward voltage without it really dropping anything. And it prevents backfeeding, so it's just better power management. It's also super inexpensive, so always consider your power management, how you're going to handle different voltage sources to prevent conflict. I've seen where two different voltage sources can actually cause the device to disconnect and reconnect, cause instability issues, especially when you're connected over the COM port. So power management is a huge thing in this operation, and if you can't figure out simple power management requirements, you're going to have a really buggy device. And if you have your OE signals improperly timed, or you have states of floating on the OE signals on your buffers, you can actually corrupt certain bytes of your memory. So the constant noise that is created, the constant on and off toggling of them, can actually disrupt what's going on with the NVRAM or the static RAM, whichever you have. So it's highly important that you have your control signals really dialed in and always in a defined state. Otherwise, you risk corruption on your memory. So let's go ahead and do a quick run here in HTS. I've got a EC-Tune base map opened up inside of it. I believe it's our stock D series or something like that. It doesn't really matter. Use case is a use case. I went ahead and plugged in the development board. We'll connect to the development board. And then we're going to go ahead and upload our base ROM. So now it should be on our development board, right? But how do we actually confirm this? The way that we confirm this is by having a development COM port. So this is the Stratosphere firmware over here. You can see that we're running the Ostrich 2 protocol. You can see that we have options such as resetting the device, options such as erasing the device. We have options of seeing how to transfer over what's on the current flash of the device. We can get a sample from the internal RAM. We can get a sample from the external memory, which in this case is the NVRAM. We can also do things like toggle the USB ports and other ports to make sure that they're going high and low, to make sure there's not an error of some kind in our trace work, or maybe a bridge connection on our soldering work, as well as we have the ability to slow down the clock speed for things like knocking the PIO down in speed for a multitude of reasons, because PIO can be a lot quicker than external memory is. With that being said, we can kind of scroll down here and we can actually see the commands that we've been receiving from the software. So we're checking out the serial number on the device, we're checking out the version of the device, we're checking the serial number again, we're getting a couple of these commands back and forth here. You can see that the ZW command is coming in for that write command, the bulk write command I should say. We can see how many chunks it's coming in, approximately 4 kilobit chunks coming through here, and we can see everything that's basically happened with HTS to get us up to this point. What I want to know is what's actually on that memory, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our option 3 and pull from our external memory. And you can see here Dennis has actually hooked us up with some really cool information feedback here. We can see some 64-bit chunks. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come to the very beginning from address 0. I'm going to highlight this for you guys. We're going to go ahead and open up that same bin file that we loaded. Store both of these. Let's go. There we go. Let's put these on a split screen here. Here we go. We got the split screen going on. I'm going to highlight in here. And you guys can go ahead and compare now and see the 64 byte chunks here. And you can see that they actually verify and measure out correctly. There's no discrepancies. And this is just a really good way of actually seeing if what you're doing is what's actually happening on the device. So this is a very powerful tool here. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is show you guys right now. You guys probably can't see, but anyhow, I have my switch enabled for the latches right now. I have them set high so they're disabled. I'm going to go ahead and move my jumper here and go ahead and enable the latches. And when I say enable the latches, we're not holding on to data, we're simply buffering. And now if I take the same read command here, check that out. We're no longer getting that valid data because we've went ahead and isolated the bus from the MCU over with the ECU side. And even though I don't have the ECU side connected, it still sees something on the input as a floating signal. And we are getting these 44s across the board, showing that our hardware is actually disconnecting the MCU side in a sense, and it is allowing the ECU side to actually drive the memory here. So this is actually some really cool software here that we have for diagnosing what's going on. And now if I was to move that control logic again to the high side so that our buffer is disabled, in this case we're using latches, and I go ahead and perform that same check, boom. We have our repeatable data coming back to us. Now, something else we can do is go ahead and turn off our latch, and let's go ahead and turn on our buffers instead. So now we're rocking with the buffers instead of latches. I'm going to perform that same read. You can see that we're getting that same repeatable data coming out of it. And if I inject my OKI signal as a low signal from the ECU, meaning the ECU is accessing the memory, and we try to perform a read here, you'll see once again we're getting these random numbers in here, these 44s. And what that's telling us is that we are now driving, again, we're driving from that ECU side instead of driving directly from the MCU side. So it is showing us this garbage right now, but in actuality, when the ECU is driving, it's going to pull back exactly what it wants to see from the exact locations. But this example here is showing us isolation and ownership. And without a developer COM port like this, you really wouldn't be able to tell what is actually happening. And it is just one of the powerful tools that comes with building a capable firmware on the device. And we can also check across right now, for example, from the internal SRAM. And as you can see, it's all Fs because right now I have the internal SRAM disabled, so we can't actually access the internal SRAM because everything is being handled directly on the external memory right here. Real quick, I'll go ahead and drive that bus high again. There it is. So this is the power of having a custom-built firmware where it can dump and feedback and show you guys what's happening with the device. This is the power of a development board where you can inject signals. You don't have to worry about cutting traces. You don't have to worry about removing something or adding soldered on jumper wires. You can just inject the signals as you need them. And it's an amazing device, really. I can't express the power that comes into having a development tool and having a well-built software like this. And I think an area where a lot of these developers are falling short is they're trying to wear both hats. And when you wear both hats, you get a halfway fucking anticipated version of each side. I'm able to focus entirely on hardware, and Dennis is able to focus entirely on the software, and by working together, we're able to develop something that is really strong, powerful, and has amazing diagnostic feedback. This is something other people are lacking on. They don't know when the OE signal is really transparent and when it's not. They don't know if the buffer is really doing what it's supposed to. They're using LEDs on their data bus side and their address bus side, which is hilarious because you can't see the data bus or the address bus change on an LED and the state that it's changed within the MCU itself. I mean, the Oki processor is clocking at 100 nanoseconds on average for these cycle checks. You can't see an LED on 100 nanoseconds. We're talking what, a 10 millionth of a second? And you're expecting the human eye to see that on an LED? I think it's hilarious when people are working on an emulation project and they have a address and bus indicator installed, i.e. a two-timer or a socket tester. There's no reason for that. You just need to have good diagnostic feedback over your developer COM port. These are sophisticated devices despite the extreme low cost. This black RP 2350B developer board that I'm using here for this instance of teaching how these things work, these are a 99-cent developer board. $4 on a non-sale day. So I mean, it costs nothing to get this compute power, and you can still have a multitude of COM ports. You can have a developer COM port, you can have a data log COM port, and you can have an emulation COM port. And yet you'll still see people out there that have one COM port and they can't tell what's actually happening. So it's interesting. It's funny, but if I wasn't here to have a little bit of humility on it and show these things, we wouldn't be able to get here, right? As I told you guys in my initial release on the emulation project, when I was first working on these emulator boards, I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to get my diagnostic feedback over UART through a separate FTDI device. I didn't have USB parity going on to make sure that I had solid USB communication. I didn't have adequate power management. I wasn't using level shifting of any kind. I wasn't using 5-volt tolerant devices. I mean, the list goes on. And you can really only learn these things through trial and error and from studying the science of how these things work. I have zero interest in understanding how someone else's device works. It does me no good. I'm not here to reverse engineer something. I'm here to engineer something from the ground up and expose my flaws, my faults, my weaknesses, humiliate myself along the way so that other people can see how to do this. It's funny. We're not worried you're going to steal our work. We're worried that if we don't share our work, that you won't succeed. So that's alpha for you. We're not living in fear. We're living in fear that you won't succeed. So by all means, pay attention to our releases and what we're doing, because we're only here to help you through our own failures and flaws and show you where we are succeeding in things at work. And by creating prototype devices without injection methods or worrying about the size or what they can do, you're typically shooting yourself in the foot and going backwards. If I did everything based off of my micro devices, I would have almost no way to troubleshoot what's happening or to inject something it's not easy to inject or cut traces when you have a 4-layer circuit board. It's not easy to inject or cut traces when they're surface mount and they're on the bottom side, they're quad, no flat leads. It doesn't work. So make your development footprint something you can work with, something you can inject on, and really focus on what you're doing. Work with someone else if possible. I mean, having a developer comport is huge. You're just working backwards if you're trying to do these things on your own. And if you're closed source, just understand that we're coming for you. We are coming for you. We are tired of watching you guys fill your pockets. We're tired of the shitty support that you give to people. We're tired of watching everything being an imported good and being sold off here in the States. We're tired of how things can't be repaired. We're tired of people not knowing how the stuff works or where to make the corrections. We're done with that stuff. We're tired of there being no elasticity in the marketplace, and we're not stopping. This price tag you guys are getting on your emulators is gonna fucking stop. Whether it's because you're buying my devices at a stupid low cost because people want to get them from me, or whether everyone is copying my work and reselling at a much lower cost than what you're selling at. You can't compare and compete in a marketplace where you're charging $250 for something where someone else is selling it for $89. It's not going to happen. So, all I can say to the closed source developers out there is you might want to start becoming a little more transparent about your work, and you might want to start to drop your price tag and hope that people stay and stick with you, because when people realize that you're selling $5 to $25 worth of hardware at $250 to $400 a board, they're going to stop supporting you. This is 20-year-old tech, and I think that the people are tired of it. They're tired of being monopolized, they're tired of being overcharged, and they're tired of being underserviced. So, thank you for viewing. Appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, share this stuff, get it out there, post it on groups and forums, let people see it. A lot of these guys are going to be trying to flag the stuff, removing the stuff. I'm open source, so I'm not getting any sort of benefit or advertisement from sharing what's going on. I'm only here to share a open source project that is free, inexpensive to individuals who want to compile the stuff themselves with the available resources that we're making, and empower the people. We have free tuning software, so why can't we have free emulation to go with it? It makes no sense to me. Get this out there. Alpha is happening, and it's not stopping. Thanks, guys.